guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Amanda Shee. I'm an anesthesiologist and intensivist. And today I want to talk about my current episode of burnout as an academic physician anesthesiologist and intensivist, and some of the lessons. There's two specific lessons about saying no and taking control of my life and my situation. In a previous video that I had uploaded to this channel, somewhere here, I talk about episodes of burnout that I went through as a resident. There were a couple of different instances where I really could identify that I was burnt out, and there were a number of factors that led to that. In general, I tell trainees that you should expect to burn out at some point during internship, residency, fellowship, at some point during training, because it is an arduous journey, and it's also very time consuming and not natural to work as much as we do during our medical training. But I had always thought that as an attending, it would get better. I thought that once I was done with training, that magically everything would be easier, that the schedule is easier, so therefore everything else would be better, that there would be less pressure overall. And I have to say, I feel like I was very surprised by the transition to being an attending, because it didn't necessarily get easier. There are definitely benefits to being an attending. There are definitely things that I find to be much easier now. And of course, the schedule is definitely better. But in terms of trying to manage burnout as an attending, I think that there are other additional things that I had not anticipated when I became an attending that could happen that would lead to potential burnout. In my last video, I go over 6 different tips to address burnout and hopefully prevent it. If you are about to embark on your residency training or about to start something new, I think that these tips are really good. And just as a reminder, those 6 tips were: number 1, acknowledging when you're burnt out; making time for sleep is number 2; leaning on support is 3; exercise when able; number 5 is scaling back on commitments; and number 6 is controlling what you can. Now, I actually want to focus on the last 2 parts of the last 2 tips that I had recommended in my last video. In those last 2 tips, I will say that in the last year since I recorded that video, I have done a terrible job of those 2 particular things. And that has led me to this current episode of feeling burnt out. So let me back up a little bit. What incited all of this was I recently had put in request to have a day off. And when I got the notification that that particular vacation request was denied, I suddenly felt all this pent up frustration, exhaustion, and resentment for my job. It was just like it boiled up, bubbled over, and I was like, okay, actually, this is not okay. And it took getting a vacation denial to realize that I was feeling burnt out again. And it's interesting because it was really obvious when I started almost 2 years ago as an attending, when I was working 70-hour work weeks clinically, and I realized, hey, like, I'm working too much. This is why I am feeling burnt out and exhausted and frustrated with my job. And that was an obvious thing. But this time around, it wasn't really clear to me why I was so upset about this, because at the end of the day, the reality is there are certain staffing issues that come up, especially with the pandemic. So having a request for a day off be rejected is not a big deal. It is the reality of life, is that you can't get everything you ask for, you can't get everything you want in life. And so it's a part of work as well, that not everything that I want is what I'm gonna get. And so having a single day be rejected should not have led me to feel this much frustration. And it took me sitting down with one of my colleagues to realize, when she straight up said, "You're burnt out," I it was like a light bulb went off, like bing, actually something else is going on right now. I'm not just frustrated because I had a day rejected. I'm frustrated because there were a lot of things that I was not acknowledging, so not listening to my tip number 1 about how I had set up my schedule and what was going on. So let's talk about focusing on those 2 things with my particular situation as an example. So number 1, in terms of the first lesson that I'm taking away from this is the scaling back on commitments and saying no. So I will say that I absolutely listened to myself and definitely said no to a number of different opportunities and things that I normally would just constantly say yes to. So for example, there are a number of online virtual shadowing things, there are a number of meetings and stuff like that that I was like, you know what? I don't think that this is going to add value, or I don't think that this is going to work out for what's going on in my life at that time. So I'm just not going to accept the invitation to do certain things. And I'm pretty proud of myself that I was able to work on saying no to those things. But on the flip side, I have actually made a couple of significant financial investments and have spent a pretty significant amount of money that led me to think that I needed to pick up an extra position at another hospital. It turns out, and I had thought, oh, this is just gonna be a day here or there. This hospital is within our health system. It should be super easy. But it turns out that it's actually quite complicated to pick up a per diem job in another hospital. And that is when I'm full-time clinically in my current hospital, which on average means that I'm working 50 hours a week at least. So imagine the 50 hours a week plus adding another job. It's actually not that tenable, even though I thought, oh, if I just keep working like a resident, that's what all the financial people tell you. They say work like a resident, save like a resident, and you will become on your way to financial freedom. Well, it's not so simple at that point. So anyway, long story short, turns out trying to pick up an extra position at a different hospital to help out actually added a lot of extra stress that I had not acknowledged or even realized until I was faced with the fact that I actually had no reliable transportation to get to this particular position. And on top of that, there was a significant financial investment up front in order to even start in the position, and a time investment and a bunch of paperwork and stuff. It's like the paperwork never ends. It just keeps coming on and on and on. Anytime you're considering just to add something else on, recognize that usually these things are not as simple as they sound. And I made that mistake. So that was something that was a big lesson for me when I realized things were not going to work out and I wasn't going to be able to pick up these shifts and work in a different place. So I ended up deciding that that was not a good fit for me. But it took a lot of extra stress and unnecessary work and time in order to come to this realization. So that was kind of a lesson learned for me. Another thing that I did a poor job in saying no to were some of these academic things. Now, I am going to kind of delve a little deeper into all of that in the next lesson, but the fact that I kept saying yes to certain academic things like giving grand rounds talks and signing up for different talks and submitting papers and doing all this stuff, I realized that actually saying no to those things was harder than saying no to certain other things that for some reason, well, I take this back. It's because I'm in an academic environment. And the other thing is I still have this mindset from training. And, you know, when you are working towards a goal for over 10 years, so the whole being a pre-med, then going to medical school and trying to get a residency. Once you're a resident, trying to get a fellowship. Once you're a fellow, trying to get a job. So there's just all of these unspoken expectations and rules and kind of checklists for things that you need to have on your CV or have on your resume in order to achieve these goals. So I think that being in this mindset for the last decade of my life in thinking that I have to keep adding these accolades and I have to keep checking off these boxes was the reason that I kept saying yes to things that actually, in the grand scheme of things, are not adding to my goals in life. This kind of leads into the second lesson that I learned from this whole episode of being burnt out. And in terms of taking control of things, so I didn't think I really expounded on this in the last video when it comes to taking control. What I wanted to focus on today was the fact that I needed to take control of the things that would help me get the rest that I needed and the kind of refreshment and the time off that I need in order to recharge my brain so I can go back in refreshed and ready to take on whatever task or whatever issue that I am faced with. So in life and in my job as an attending, there are going to always be things that are out of my control. So one of the things that's out of my control is the fact that I am in a position where I work with residents and learners. And what that means is that when I was a trainee, I only ever did one operating room. I stayed in one operating room and I focused on those patients. Every once in a while, a different patient would get moved into my room and I would look up that patient. But at the end of the day, I focused on the patients in my room. Now I have two rooms with oftentimes two trainees, so one trainee in each room. And that actually it's very, very gratifying. And the reason why I stayed in academic practice is because I love working with learners and I love being challenged and learning from them. I mean, while I have things to teach, their residents by far have lots and lots to teach me as well. And so that's why I think it actually makes me a better physician and makes me a better doctor to be able to work with learners and trainees. But that also means that there is unsaid work and time spent when this is the case. So for example, when I have two residents, oftentimes I have to look up double the patients than when I was a trainee because I have two rooms. And on top of that, if the residents are junior residents or are new to a rotation or they haven't done a certain case, I actually spend sometimes a half an hour, an hour of my time the night before in order to have our pre-op call be flexible enough and actually cover all the things that we need to cover in order to keep our patients safe and do our anesthesia. As a result, it actually takes a lot of extra time. And I hadn't anticipated this when I was a trainee. I totally just didn't think about it, that it would take potentially double the time. But that's out of my control. That's a part of the job. The things that are in my control, however, are the use of my vacation time. What I have been doing for the last 2 years is using the majority of my vacation time for my extracurricular activities. So what that means is I am very active in the American Medical Women's Association. I'm actually representing right now. And one of the things I've done for almost a decade now is run our annual conference. And what I was doing is taking my vacation weeks in order to plan and be a part of this conference, which even though it's vacation time, I'm actually working basically another full-time job doing that work. Okay, I'm back. My camera ran out of battery, so here we are. And clearly I'm charging it, if you can see that this is a lot closer now. So anyway, the thing that I wanted to go over was that I was using all of my vacation time for things that were not work, but were essentially work. And I wasn't taking the time off to actually be off. So even though I would have weekends off, I would be working on putting together the AMWA program book. Even though I would have a non-clinical day, I would fill it with things related to ACGME, like reviewing different programs, or for AMWA, I'd be replying to all my emails. I also have a position within the hospital as a medical director of procedural sedation, so I would try to spend some of those non-clinical days working on that. And of course, I still do stuff online and social media and all this other work. And so it got to a point where I realized that for the last 2 years, it's been actually over 2 years, I hadn't taken a vacation. I just hadn't had a chance to ever feel like I was able to sleep in and do the things that really refresh me and fill my cup up. And so there was a realization when this particular vacation day or request was rejected that this hadn't happened. The other big thing that I wanted to get at that's related to the fact that I had been using all my vacation time for these non-work but work things was that at the end of the day, there were a lot of things I was saying yes to that I thought I had to say yes to. Even though I am in an academic institution, being full-time clinical is actually enough in order to keep my job and to progress in my job because I'm contributing to the education mission and the clinical mission of the institution and the department. So there are other academic institutions that require that you're academically productive in order to maintain your position, and I'm not in one of those. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to stay in this academic environment, was because even though I hadn't anticipated being academic, I 100% love the environment and love the fact that I get to teach and work with trainees. So I was realizing that I was saying yes to certain things that would help with academic promotion, but actually wouldn't help with my own career promotion and my own career goals. So my career goals are to eventually be non-clinical. And I have to keep saying that out loud because it's something that I have not been respecting in my decision making. And that is one of the big lessons that I took away from this is something that's in my control. Saying no to specific things because of the fact that they don't contribute to my overall career goal, that's a really important lesson for me. And it is really hard to say no to certain things that I think I should be saying yes to because of the environment I'm in. And yeah, that was a really big deal to me, is that I'm in an academic place, so I think, oh, I have to say yes to grand rounds talks. I have to say yes to trying to publish a paper for the summer program that I started for medical students. I have to do all of these things to check off the boxes to be promoted. But at the end of the day, I actually don't. I actually have the choice to say no to that because I don't have an interest in being a full professor at Harvard. And so that's one of the things that was the biggest lesson that I took away from this particular episode of Being Burnt Out. And I think that it's an important lesson that all of you guys, as you're going through your journey, need to realize, and in whatever specialty or whatever profession you're in, that you need to realize if something seems like you need to be doing it, you probably should sit down and think about why it is you think you need to be doing it. Is that really something that is going to contribute to your big picture goals in life and in your career? Anyway, I think that there was a lot of going off in various tangents, sharing personal stuff in this particular video, but I think that burnout is a very, very personal thing. And I hope that some of these two lessons that I really took away from this episode of Being Burnt Out can help some of you guys, or at least help reframe things so that if you're feeling like you are in this situation, that you have the tools to sit down and say, wait a second, let me control the things that I can control, and let me actually say no to the things that are not contributing to the big picture goals that I have in life and in my career. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it to this point, pop a comment in below with your favorite emoji, because I just love different emojis and how people like to express themselves. If you like my content, please give me a thumbs up to help me with the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to hear more from me, please subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.